Hey guys, I'm back. And in today's chat, we're going to have a look at a few different ways of carrying extra fuel while on those long overlanding trips. So guys, the project started. You've gone out, you've bought yourself an overland vehicle or a 4x4 of some sort, and you're now about to start the kitting process. And the first thing we generally do when we're adding accessories to our truck is we go out, we get ourselves a decent suspension system, we put on a set of off-road tires. Next comes maybe a front and a rear bumper and some good solid underbody protection. And just then when you think you're just about on top of it, you get that really exciting call from a buddy or maybe your local four-wheel drive club to say, today you've been invited on your first long-range overlanding trip. And by long range, I mean your first trip where the fuel capacity of your current vehicle is not enough to get you between fuel stops. Now you've got to make the decision. What tool are you going to use to carry extra fuel? So the first thing you're going to have to take a look at is how much extra fuel do you need? And what we've found through experience is in most cases, you generally need somewhere on a very short stint of about 20 extra litres all the way up to around about 80 or 100 litres, depending on obviously the gap between the fuel stops and how much your vehicle can carry and the vehicle consumption. So the four options we're going to look at today, I've listed, and this is my opinion, please. So it's what works for you moving forward, and you may choose over time to select 2 or 3 different options and add them together depending on the range of the trip. But today we're going to look at fuel bladders. We're going to take a brief look at roof rack mounted tanks or load bin tanks. Next up will be the old trusty jerrycan, and finally my favorite one, the auxiliary fuel tank. So number 4 on my list, which is number 4, it's not my favorite by any means, and it's probably something I'd use only if I'd really have to, is something called a fuel bladder. So they all look very much like this. It's a bag, it's got a cap. One would need to fill the bag very, very carefully at the fuel stop, close it up, and then that would be strapped somewhere inside the vehicle. Now the advantages, or the pros rather, of the bladder is firstly, they can fold up nice and small when you're not using them. And they're also relatively inexpensive. The downsides, firstly, they're limited in size. You wouldn't want an 80-litre bladder floating around inside your car. I'm not too fond of the filling, and obviously when you take the fuel out and need to fill up the vehicle, you're going to need some form of spout attached here, and generally speaking, you're going to make a mess. And once this gets smelly, this is now going to have to go back in the car in some form of plastic bag, and all in all, it's just not really a hassle-free solution. However, if you only need a small amount of fuel and you're on a budget, this would probably be your number 1 choice. And it's also something you probably wouldn't be using all the time. It'd be on the occasional emergency trip, in which case, as I say, it's nice and small, it'll fold up, and you can take this along for just in case. Number 3 on our list today is the externally mounted tank, which would either go on top of the car on the roof rack or mounted in the back of the load bin. These are generally speaking a largish rectangular tank, and they are actually very good value for money considering the volume that they carry. So good value for money. Downsides to this, you've got to fill the tank, which is up on top of the vehicle or in the load bin, which could get a little bit messy. You also have to manually get the fuel out of the tank and put it into the vehicle, which can also be, again, another messy process. For me, I think the biggest downside is 2 things. Firstly, they take up very valuable packing space, either on the rack or in the back of the load bin. And secondly, especially the roof rack option, it increases the vehicle's center of gravity. And ideally, we will always want to be trying to keep the weight as low as possible. So although a cost-effective solution might not be the best one for you. Number 2 on our list is the faithful jerrycan. I've got one here for us to have a look at. These made of steel, nice strong design. The green ones are for fuel, petrol. The yellow ones generally used for diesel. They're cost effective, robust, and a very, very good tool for transporting fuel. The cons for this unit is Sometimes the cap doesn't seal 100%. You need to double check that. The seal wears out, so that's got to be replaced regularly. You want to have them strapped down firmly on the roof so they're not rubbing against each other, so using a bracket would be a good idea. They can be a little messy. When transferring the fuel to the vehicle, it slops around a bit. If the funnel doesn't fit on perfectly, it can get a little bit gooey around here. And that, I would say, is probably the biggest downside of these, is actually the transferring of fuel. Other than that, not a bad option. And now on to my personal favorite, the auxiliary fuel tank. Today we're going to take a quick look at the 75-litre fuel tank, which has been designed for the Land Cruiser double cab pickup. And just before we have a closer look, let's just run through the pros and cons like we did with the other items. So firstly, for me, the single con is the price point. They are a little more expensive than the other items, but they are better value if you look at the complete package. Pros-wise, firstly, the auxiliary fuel tank, because it's fitted to the vehicle, it's not fitted anywhere you're carrying luggage, so it's not taking up any important packing space in the vehicle. They're mounted low in the vehicle, so they only improve the performance by dropping the center of gravity. There's a no fuss, no mess system with these fuel tanks, so there's no hassle when you're filling and transferring fuel from one tank to the other. And finally, for me, one of the most important points, because I really, really hate going to the pump all the time, is you could probably halve the number of times you need to fill up in a month if this vehicle is your day-to-day driver. Simply by reducing the number of times one needs to go to the fuel stations. Included in the package, bang for your buck, the first thing we want to look at is the 3 CR12 stainless steel fuel tank. As I've said, this is a 75-litre unit, and if you take a close look at the welding and things, you can see this is beautifully crafted. Next in the kit, we also get a complete chassis bracket mounting system, including all the hardware, a full piping kit with hardware, which is used to attach the auxiliary tank firstly to the filling system, and then also creating a transfer system as well as a breather system. And finally in the kit is a full concise fitting instruction manual. This is why I say it's very good value for money, even though the price point is a little bit higher than the other items. So we've unboxed the kit, double checked that everything's there, and read the instruction manual carefully. Straight after that, the guys have fitted the tank, and as you can see, looking up at the vehicle, the tank has been very, very nicely placed between the chassis rails, very firmly fixed with all the correct hardware and mounting brackets, and after that, the piping has been done. The filler section of the tank, or the filler pipe, is connected to the OE filler. So when you fill your main tank, you also at the same time automatically are filling the auxiliary tank. This does take a little bit longer because you're filling 2 tanks, but because of the breather system I mentioned earlier, there should be no airlock, so filling should be very easy. Next, we fit a balance fitting to the main tank, and that is the inlet for the fuel when it gravity feeds from the back tank or the auxiliary tank into the main tank. So I keep saying gravity feed. And I've been asked this question many, many times. With auxiliary fuel tanks, you have 2 different options of transferring fuel from the auxiliary tank to the main tank. In this particular case, we've got a system called gravity feed, and this is how it works. You've got the main tank of the vehicle permanently mounted, and the auxiliary tank mounted at the rear of the vehicle, and as you can see by my diagram, the auxiliary tank is higher than the main tank. When these are full, they both fill up at the same time, and as you start driving, both tanks start emptying themselves. And as they empty together, the fuel gravity feeds down between the 2 tanks. This will mean that your fuel gauge will also drop very slowly until both tanks get to around about 1/3 of where the bottom tank is, or your main tank, because that's where we fitted the balance fitting. Once it gets down here to the balance fitting, then your fuel gauge will start reading accurately and you'll be back to whatever your normal range would have been from that mark on the gauge. The second option we have is tanks which need transferring using an electric pump. Here's an example of one. It's a small facet pump, and these are mounted in line between the main tank and the auxiliary tank. And the reason one needs these is because on some vehicles, the auxiliary tank gets mounted at a lower level to the main tank, or the feed needs to get over accessories and things under the car, chassis brackets and things like that, and gravity will simply not lift the fuel over those items. So we fit a pump in line between the two tanks, which operates off a switch inside the cab. And once you've drained the main tank or got the main tank down to maybe the quarter mark, you flip the switch and the pump will then slowly start moving fuel across to the other tank. And those are the two different options of fuel transfer we get in the market when it comes to auxiliary fuel tanks. So we've had a look at a couple of options of how to carry extra fuel on your long trips. If you have any further questions regarding any of these options, please don't hesitate to post either something in the comments or give us a shout at the office. The guys would love to hear from you. I'll respond on YouTube as quickly as I can. So thanks a lot for watching. I hope you've got a little bit of insight out of today's shoot. And if you have and you've enjoyed it, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And I look forward to seeing you all next time. Take care. Cheers.